Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, James. Can you confirm if you're able to see my screen and you can hear me fine? Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining today's presentation. Super excited to speak to all of you today on how to unlock product growth with big data, data science, and machine learning. And I also want to thank the LambdaConf community for giving me this opportunity to be here and join virtually despite my work schedule conflict and share my experience with all of you today. And I also want to add that I'm not speaking on behalf of Microsoft, but rather sharing the knowledge and experience that I have gained along the journey, along my career journey. And yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So here I want to talk about some products and how they leverage data to drive their product growth. I think Netflix is one such product that all of us are familiar with. They use data for driving their recommendation engine. They also use data to decide how do they want to invest their money into putting what kind of into producing what kind of content based on what's resonating with users. They also use data to decide how to store the movies in which CDN location so that the movies stream efficiently for users based on their geographic location. Next is we know Tesla uses data for powering their autonomous driving system. They also have cameras and sensors that's constantly monitoring and sending data back to Tesla, which in turn can be used to further improve their self-driving model. Amazon is one company that uses data throughout their entire product stack. They use data for uh, deciding how to surface the search results, for their pricing prediction. They also use data for their inventory management, warehouse optimization, just many ways in which Amazon uses data throughout their entire product stack. Instagram again, if you are users of Instagram, you would know that all the content that you see on Instagram is so engaging. It's because there is a machine learning model that's running real time that is trying to decide what kind of content to show you based on your engagement with Instagram, based on users who are very similar to you, how they interact with Instagram. All of that data is taken to real time show you stuff that keeps you engaging and busy on the platform on Instagram. Next is Microsoft 365. This is where I work as a senior technical product manager. Today, Microsoft 365 has Copilot integrated into it. That's one way that they use data to optimize your entire productivity suite experience between Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all of that, that seamlessly integrates to give you a great experience. So what I want to drive home the fact here is that all of these products, they have a huge customer base and they generate a huge amounts of data. And today's storage, computing, and processing has become so cheap that you can store all of this data, which in turn can be used to extract insight that can be used to drive further innovation and growth for your product. So let's say that you join as a product manager for any of these big companies. You're constantly getting signals, data from various sources, could be feedback data, could be usage data, could be sales data, revenue data, engagement data, all of these different data that's coming back to you about a product that you own. And your job as a product manager is to organize all of this data in a clever way. Could be using data science algorithms, data science techniques, and other such techniques, such that you can extract insight out of it that in turn you can further use to build and grow your product and in turn grow your business. So, which is why I say that the future of technical product management is the melding of data science and product management. So, what you can expect from this talk is how to build data driven products backed by insightful analysis and how to utilize big data, data science, and machine learning to inform complex product decisions. So in the product life cycle, there are different indicators, leading indicators and lagging indicators. Leading indicators are for which you get the data very quickly about your product and you can use it to further grow your product. Whereas lagging indicators are those for which you need to have deployed the product for a certain amount of time. You need to have users using your product. You need to get the data back about the usage in order to be able to build those inferences and further gain insights out of it. So, because of the fact that this presentation is only 25 minutes, we might not go into detail into all each one of them, but I'll go into detail in a few of these analysis, which I use in my day-to-day basis to make a very data-driven product roadmap, data-driven analysis on how to grow the product, how to enhance the product, and how to build the product. So first is funnel analysis. Funnel analysis is nothing but a method used to analyze the sequence of events leading up to a point of conversion. So let's say that you are a product manager for an e-commerce website like Amazon. So this is you have you have visitors coming into your website. Maybe they want to purchase a product. They search for the product that they want to purchase. They add the product to cart. They go to checkout and then they complete purchase. That's the ideal journey, but not every customer will follow the same journey. Customers keep dropping off at different stages of the journey, which is why it looks like a funnel. So you have 100% of visitors who came, and at the next level 40% dropped off, and then eventually customers kept dropping off. So the funnel kept getting shorter and shorter. So let's say, as a product manager, if you had this data, what you can do is you can hypothesize where exactly are customers dropping off. And once you can have that data, you can then run experiments to see how can you validate your hypothesis to eventually improve the conversion rate for the journey that you own. So let's say you own an email sign up flow, and you see that majority of customers are dropping off at a certain stage. If you had that data, then you can actually go about improving it. So if I were a product manager for this, if I see that majority of customers are dropping off in the home screen, then maybe I'll hypothesize that the page is too slow, and then I will try to improve the performance, run experiments, and validate that eventually customers are able to stay in the funnel. If I see that majority of customers are dropping off at the checkout and purchase page, then maybe I can hypothesize that the price is too expensive, or that my competitor is giving a better price. So once you have that data, we'll then look at how later in this presentation how to run A/B experiments, which in turn will guide you to improve the conversion rate for your product. Next is segmentation analysis. Segmentation analysis is nothing but how do you slice and dice your customer segment based on different characteristics. Could be geographic, could be usage, could be age, income, gender, different characteristics. How do you group your customers? And then identify these clusters, which in turn will help you market and target your product to these different users differently. So here I have a 2D scatter plot. This is what my customers would look like if I were to segment them based on income and age. The three things that I've circled could be attributed as outliers. And then I have four distinct clusters. Maybe the students are young income, maybe they can be attributed as students because they are younger in age, they have lower income. Then we could have maybe techies. We can say that, hey, these are the folks that are somewhere middle income, middle age, followed by executives, followed by retires. The point of doing this clustering analysis is so that you can identify your different population segments, and then you can you can give different product features, product attributes for each of these segments differently in order to grow your business, which is again a data driven way to further enhance your product. So what exactly is segmentation analysis? It helps you identify comparable purchase behavior. It helps you target and market your product features based on segments. If you didn't have any data, you can always start with customer data and then demographic data. Customer data could be something like products purchased, amounts spent, time of purchase, purchase frequency, and then demographic data could be things like age, income, gender, education level, things like that. So for any of your product, if you were to do this segmentation, you would identify your different market segments for your product. Next is engagement analysis. Engagement analysis is nothing but how do your customers interact with your product. So here I want to highlight that depending upon the product that you are a product manager for, the way you measure engagement will be very different. And there is no one metric that can be used to measure engagement. So your engagement metric, we'll see how it differs based on the product type that you own. So let's say that you are for someone, so a social media company like Instagram or Facebook. The way you would measure engagement is using things like likes, shares, posts, comments. If you were for a search company like Bing or Google, you would want to have a dashboard that tracks this engagement metric on a daily basis, things like search query, bounce rates, number of page visits, things like that. So if you had this data, then whenever a new feature is launched, you can see how the engagement metric is getting affected day over day, week over week, month over month. So now that we have launched Copilot at Microsoft, we see how does that affect our search results, how does that affect our page visit, and things like that. Similarly, if you are for a media company like Netflix or Amazon Prime, let's say you're introducing a new feature that optimizes users' viewing experience, maybe you want to track number of views, time spent, number of favorites, number of likes, things like that. And finally, for an e-commerce company like Amazon or Walmart, you're basically seeing products viewed, products added to cart, products purchased. So here I've just covered very high level engagement metrics for a product, but you might be owning a very specific product feature, product scenario into the place where you work, and you really want to nail down the engagement metric for your specific area. That will in turn denote how successful your feature is, how it's growing, and how can you then in turn use that data to further break down what's really happening behind the scenes to further grow your product. So user engagement nothing is nothing but it indicates how often customers use your product or how passionately they feel about your product. So you could also use generic metrics like daily active users, monthly active users to track overall generic engagement on a day-to-day basis and monthly basis. Cool. Next is A/B experimentation. I talked about how once you can hypothesize different things, you can run different experiments to validate your hypothesis and then eventually launch the change. So what I mean by that is, what exactly is A/B experimentation, right? So here I have two different Christmas greeting card. Maybe the Christmas greeting on the left, customers are more inclined to click on it, open the greeting and see it versus the one on the right. In this case, it's a trivial example. Maybe it doesn't really translate much into business outcome. I don't really care which greeting customers open and see it, but that's not always the case, right? So let's say you own an open house website. You want customers to click on that button, register for the open house, come see the house so that your house is eventually sold. In this case, the color of the button really results into the outcome for your feature. So you really care about how customers interact with your product. So here you could also A/B experiment different color of a button. Similarly, if here I want to say that, let's say you have a Nike website, there is a different search algorithm that's powering the search result on the left, and there's a different search algorithm that's powering the search result on the right. Maybe the algorithm on the left is resulting in more customers clicking on the link, opening it, adding it to cart, and then eventually purchasing. So A/B experimentation is not limited to visual things and the layout of the page, but it could also be used to experiment different backend algorithms, APIs, ML models, web services, a whole lot of things that you can A/B experiment. So, what exactly is A/B experiment? It's nothing but split testing, bucket testing, randomized control experiment. The typical use case is to compare two different versions of a web page, and you can test anything from the color of a button to the backend algorithm to the search powering search result to the layout of the page. And typically, the group A and group B, they are also referred to as control group and test group. And you want to keep all elements constant except for that one thing that you really want to test. And at the end of the experiment, you want to measure the outcome. So let's say I want to measure higher number of units sold, right? I really care about the number of care about revenue and units sold. So that is my metric, and that is what I'm measuring during the course of the experiment. And lastly, I want to say that is the best scientific way to establish causality with high probability. What I mean to say is that as a product manager, you're not making decisions based on your gut feeling or your gut instinct, saying that I think we need to launch this change because doing something like that will result in higher outcome. But rather, you are going with a very scientific approach because you're going to run an experiment for a certain duration of time, maybe say 2 months. You're going to have two different variations, and then at the end of 2 months, you're going to measure your metric, you're going to measure what it is that you care about, and then you'll eventually make a very data driven conclusive analysis, and then eventually launch the change to all users. So this is something that I have done throughout my career at Microsoft in different roles, where whenever we launch M365 features and different things that come to Word, Excel, PowerPoint, we eventually launch it to a small subset of users. We collect all the data back, we collect all the telemetry backs and see that how that feature is doing. And if everything is looking good, if all our signals, if all the different office health signals look good, then we eventually launch the change to eventually consistently increase the percentage that we expose the feature to, and then eventually launch it to the millions of worldwide population. And there's never a time that we have launched a feature to all users all at once. So yeah, A/B experiment has different stages. to just to break it down, we have problem statement. Then you want to define the hypothesis, you want to design the experiment, run the experiment, and then eventually interpret the results. So let's see each one by one. So problem statement, what I mean is that when you're designing an A/B experiment, you really want to make sure what it is that you really care about and why are you running that experiment. So let's say that you are a product manager for a travel company like Expedia or Booking.com. You want to figure out what is it that your company cares about, what is it that your organization, your leadership, and everyone cares about, so that you cater your experiments so that all the results ladder up to those metrics, because eventually that's what business cares about, right? Let's say for that year the goal of the company is to increase number of bookings, increase loyalty program participation, or maybe just increase the number of searches done on the page. So you want to make sure that your experiments cater to these uber goals of the company, so that the results actually translate into something tangible for the company. What is hypothesis? A hypothesis in an A/B experiment is a testable statement that predicts how changing something will affect a certain metric or a certain behavior. So here I like to break down hypothesis by these three different statements, and you want to be very clear about your hypothesis even before you start the experiment, because this is what will keep you grounded that you're actually testing something for the duration of the experiment. So you know that you have a problem based on evidence, and you believe that doing some change will affect some outcome as that would improve the problem, and you know that you have achieved the outcome when you see some metric change. So let's say that you are a product manager for Amazon. You're seeing lesser number of units sold on your website because of sales data, right? And you believe that incorporating social proof elements such as X number of people purchased in the last 24 hours will create a sense of urgency for the visitors on the page, and they're more likely to add the product to cart, eventually click on checkout and purchase. So that's your hypothesis, and you want to bring this new feature to your customers, but you cannot go and convince your stakeholders and your management team saying that you think you should do it. But rather, what you could do is you can run this experiment, and if your experiment data shows that indeed doing that change resulted in higher number of units sold through revenue increase, or say number of units sold, then you can go and convince that, hey, doing this conclusively shows data that doing this change results in a better outcome, and so we should eventually launch this change to all our users. Next is designing the experiment. When you're running the experiment, you want to be really clear about that key metric that you're going to measure. So let's say you want to measure revenue per user per month. You also want to determine whether are you going to run this experiment for certain section of users, all users, certain geographic markets, things like that. You also want to determine the sample size. So the industry standard is to use the formula of n is equal to 16 alpha square by delta square. So you can also sigma square by delta square. You can also use the industry standard of alpha value and power value to fit in to determine how many users do you need in your experiments at the very least to make sure that your data is statistically significant. And how long do you run the experiment? Do you run it for 2 weeks? Do you take into factor things like seasonality, days of the week, holidays, and things like that? Like, you don't want to test an email sign up flow during Christmas and New Year when customers are not even coming and opening their emails. So you want to be aware of these things depending upon the nature of your experiment. Think through, are there any external factors that would impact the data, that would impact the results? Take those things into factor when you design the experiment, and then launch the experiment. So next step is running the experiment. When you're running the experiment, you want to randomly assign users to either group A or group B. That's very important, is to make sure there is randomization, so there is no bias in the data on what you see. And you also want to partner with the dev team to instrument logging to make sure that, okay, for the duration of the experiment, maybe there is a dashboard that's collecting data on revenue per user per month. And during the course of the experiment, you can see, hey, how is it doing? In the control group, I can see that revenue is remaining same, whereas in treatment group I can see that revenue is going up. That's a good indication that your experiment is doing what it is supposed to do. And then you want to avoid peeking at data before you drive into conclusion. Finally, interpreting the result is you want to make sure you do some sanity check and also evaluate the trade-off between different metrics. So let's say you're measuring revenue and engagement. You want to make sure, is revenue going up? Is engagement going down? Things like that. How does that really impact your decision making and eventually launching the change? to all users of your product. Cool. Um, Next is feedback analysis. I think in the interest of time, I'll skip feedback analysis, and I'll go directly into machine learning. Machine learning is nothing but an application of AI that provides system the ability to learn and improve from experience without being explicitly programmed. So how do you know when exactly to use machine learning, whereas when exactly should you go with classical programming? Right? There are many cases where just classic programming can solve this problem, and you don't need machine learning in that case. But how do you figure that out, right? Let's say you have lots of data. That's a good example that machine learning is a good candidate, because you have lots of good quality, ethical, unbiased data. You have a very complex logic, such as search results, right? You cannot possibly hard code every search term saying that if users search this, show them that. If they search this, show them this thing. You want the machine to learn with time and eventually cater to different scenarios differently. Next is personalization. Things like Uber, Netflix, Amazon, all of them have a great level of personalization depending upon your user behavior. Again, machine learning is a great thing to use there. Next is you want your machine to learn with time, such as Twitter. Like what's trending on Twitter might not be trending tomorrow. What's trending on Spotify today is not trending tomorrow. So the system can learn with different usage patterns, different customer behavior, and eventually cater to those behaviors differently. So, what are the different machine learning basic types? You have supervised machine learning, unsupervised, and reinforcement. Supervised is where the machine learns from training data that is labeled. Unsupervised is where you have lots of data, but the data is not labeled. And then finally, reinforcement learning is where the machine learns on its own. So, here I'll break down very basic scenarios of machine learning that some of you might be already familiar with, but different examples where machine learning fits in, such as ranking. One example is Amazon uses machine learning for powering their search result ranking. Based on what you search, their search result is so good that the results that you see, they in most cases, like you're very much inclined to click on it, open it, add to cart, and interaction, and all of those things. Next is recommendation. Again, Netflix has this recommendation model. The great thing about recommendation is it doesn't have to be super accurate. As long as it's close to accurate, customers are happy. So you don't need, so you can also do recommendation. It is broken down into collaborative filtering, content filtering, in the sense that it also takes your data, it also takes data of users similar to you to build a model that in turn caters to show you good recommendation. Classification, again, Amazon has so many products. Every day a new merchandise, they come into Amazon, they bring their product. You cannot possibly have a human sitting there and tagging each product that comes into the website saying that, hey, this is a dress, this is a pant, this is a skirt, or this is a toy. So there is a machine learning model that's running real time. You put your image inside, the model is automatically able to tag these images saying that what product catalog or what product category does it belong to. Next is regression. We use regression at Microsoft and my team to see how do we predict the customer support volume for different times of the day, different for holidays, for weekends, and things like that. There is a linear regression model that's running that can predict what the customer support volume will look like for M365. Next is clustering. How does Spotify group songs based on genres? That is again a machine learning model that can automatically do it. It's a great example. The machine is already trained on different songs, different categories, genres. It's tagged, and then whenever you feed the model with a new song, it can automatically tag it and group it based on genre. Finally, anomaly detection. Chase uses anomaly detection to track and flag fraudulent transaction. That's how they detect different patterns in credit card activity, and then they flag it for the user, so you know that, hey, something is unusual in your credit card. So yeah, these are the different applications of high level applications of ways you can think about how machine learning can solve a problem. If you see in all of these cases, they have lots of data. The problem is complex. You want the machine to learn with time. There is some level of personalization. So machine learning is a great candidate to fit in these problem spaces. So yeah, I think that is all I had for today. I want to thank all of you for taking the time and listening. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take it. Okay. Hmm. Hmm. Oh, oh, in my day-to-day work, or just in my way I use different technical products. Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, in my team, we basically did build a machine learning model that can automatically, in your code base, based on your different check-ins, we were able to train the model on what constitutes a buggy code versus a non-buggy code, so that when you write code in Visual Studio in real time, it was able to detect the likelihood of your code containing a bug versus it not containing a bug. So, this is how, based on GitHub repository check-ins, we train the model, and let's say you're writing your C sharp code in real time in Visual Studio for your GitHub repository. It was able to say, hey, this code, there is a 60% chance that it's buggy. And it will also highlight the line that contains the bug. Cool. Okay. Thank you, James. Thanks for the opportunity. It was nice talking. You too. Bye.